Joe stood in the dim light of the living room, his heart pounding after hearing the eerie whisper. Not me, not me. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if something unseen was watching him. As he stared at the fireplace, he saw faint embers glowing as if a fire had just been lit, though he hadn't touched it. Determined to extinguish the fire, Joe stepped forward and put it out. Then, he carried James downstairs, telling himself that maybe he was just overtired. Maybe he'd imagined the whisper, the sudden warmth of the fireplace, the feeling of being watched. He reached the living room to clean up the broken mirror shards scattered across the floor. But as he knelt down to pick them up, the TV flickered to life with a burst of static. Joe froze, staring as a grainy black and white video started playing. In the video, an old man sat in the exact same spot on the couch, his face worn and tired, eyes staring straight into the camera. The man's mouth moved, slowly forming words that Joe couldn't hear. But he could make out the shapes of the man's mouth, forming a haunting phrase. It made me do it. Joe felt a chill run down his spine. The man on the screen wasn't just watching him. It felt as if he were speaking directly to him. Just as suddenly as it had started, the TV shut off, leaving Joe in silence. He took a deep breath, his heart racing, now convinced there was something beyond explanation in this house. Without a second thought, Joe dashed up the stairs, desperate to check on James. He burst into James's room, only to find an empty bed. Panic seized him as he searched frantically, calling his son's name. But there was no response. Then he heard a faint voice, filled with fear, calling out, "Dad, help me, help me, help me." Joe froze, trying to locate where the voice was coming from, but it seemed to echo from all around him. Just as his desperation reached a fever pitch, he heard another voice, Emma's, shouting from outside. "James, stay there. Don't move. I'll come to you." Joe bolted down the stairs and into the front yard, where Emma, her face pale and terrified, pointed up at the house. "He's on the balcony. 3rd floor," she gasped. Joe felt his stomach drop. The 3rd floor? They never used that floor. It was practically empty, filled only with a few forgotten boxes from the previous owners. And yet, there was James, a small figure standing on the balcony edge, crying as he looked down. Without a word, Joe and Emma ran back into the house, racing up the stairs to the 3rd floor. When they reached the room, they found James standing in the middle of the floor, his back to them, completely still. Emma called softly, "James, what's happening? Are you okay? Come here, honey." But James didn't move, nor did he respond. He simply stood there, staring straight ahead, as if in a trance. Joe took a cautious step forward, his voice gentle but firm. "James, are you okay? Is there something you want to tell us?" James slowly turned to face his father, a strange smile spreading across his lips, a smile that didn't belong to the boy Joe knew. His eyes were cold, distant, filled with an unsettling energy. In a voice that seemed both familiar and alien, James said, "Do you remember me, Dad? It's me." Joe felt a coldness settle over him. Yes, of course you're my son. You're James, my dear boy. Please tell me you're all right." But James's smile twisted into a sneer, his face contorting as he spoke, his voice dripping with bitterness. "No, I'm not. You don't remember me, Joe. Don't blame me for this. But I'll make sure you remember me for the rest of your life, Mr. Waite." Joe's breath caught in his throat. Mr. Waite. The name sounded strange, completely unfamiliar. He had no idea why James would call him that. It made no sense. He stared into his son's eyes, trying to understand, but they seemed darker now, filled with a resentment that was completely out of place. Whoever or whatever was speaking through James, it wasn't his son.